Hello, my name is Michael, and I obsess. I come across something that grabs me and I consume until I can't take anymore, and then I'm on to the next. Some obsessions last a week, others a lifetime. It is my intention to explore these obsessions with you as they occur while the passion is hot. Welcome to Eclectic Obsessions. Ever since the Amityville horror book came out in 1977, I have been aware of them. I have fluctuated between belief and disbelief from the beginning, but they have never been less than fascinating. We will be exploring Ed and Lorraine Warren on this episode of Eclectic Obsessions. Edward Warren Minnie and Lorraine Rita Warren were American paranormal investigators and authors associated with prominent cases of hauntings. Edward was a World War II United States Navy veteran and former police officer who became a self-taught and self-professed demonologist, author, and lecturer. Lorraine professed to be a clairvoyant and a light trance medium who worked closely with her husband. In 1952, the Warrens founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, the oldest ghost hunting group in New England. They authored numerous books about the paranormal and about their private investigations into various reports of paranormal activity. They claim to have investigated over 10,000 cases during their career. The Warrens were among the very first investigators in the controversial Amityville haunting. According to the Warrens, the New England Society for Psychic Research uses a variety of individuals, including medical doctors, researchers, police officers, nurses, college students, and members of the clergy in its investigations. Stories of ghost hauntings popularized by the Warrens have been adapted or have indirectly inspired dozens of films, television series, and documentaries, including 17 films in the Amityville horror series and 5 films in the Conjuring universe, with 2 more yet to be released. For over 50 years, Ed and Lorraine Warren have been considered consultant experts on the subject of spirits and demonology. Religious authorities have called them in to investigate outbreaks of diabolical phenomena. Cases where priests become possessed, cases where people are physically attacked, cases where entities manifest, time is altered, and the physical environment is completely rearranged, cases where spirits don't just haunt a house, they visibly tear it apart. Ed and Lorraine Warren have dedicated their lives to this work, and they share the wisdom they have gained during their extraordinary career in this field. Ed grew up in a haunted house in Connecticut. My father, who was a police officer at the time, would often say, "Ed, there's a logical reason for everything that happens in this house," but he never came up with that logical reason. My family would all go to bed, and just around 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, many times I would hear the closet door beginning to open up. At first I'd look into that closet and see only shapeless darkness. Then slowly I'd start to see a light beginning to form, and it would morph into like a ball shape, sort of a basketball, and then I'd begin to see a face in that ball, the face of an old woman, and she was not looking at all pleasant. The ball would then come into my bedroom accompanied by audible footsteps and heavy breathing. The room would then become icy cold, an unnatural cold, a psychic cold, and I'm saying to myself, "Ed, there's a logical reason for everything." But by that time I was out of the bed and right between my mother and father in their room. When Ed Warren was 16 years old, he worked as an usher in the Colonial Theater in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and it was there that he met Lorraine Rita Moran. Lorraine and her mother used to come every Wednesday night, Ed remembered. I'd see Lorraine coming in and we started talking, and we became friends. I was 16 at the time and she was 16. One night I walked her home and asked her for a date, and that's how it all got started. Ed Warren went into the Navy on his 17th birthday, and 4 months later, after his ship sank in the North Atlantic, he was home for 30 days survivor's leave. It was during that leave that the two were married. When Ed returned after World War II, he and Lorraine had a daughter, and Ed went to Perry Art School, which is a subsidiary of Yale, for about 2 years. I got fed up with that, Ed said. I told Lorraine one day, "You know, I can paint better than these instructors. What they're teaching me is a lot of geometry and a lot of nonsense that I don't need for painting." I said, "We'll have some fun." So I bought this car for $15, which I still have in the yard. It's a 1933 Chevy Eagle Deluxe. The guy gave me 2 wheels with it. I had to pay him off on time, $5 a week. I said to Lorraine, you know, if we go up to new areas where they're opening up for tourists like Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, I'll bet I can take a bunch of my paintings and put them out there where people are walking by, and we'll sell some. The Warrens did have fun. We were making a fantastic living, selling paintings for fabulous prices, $3, $4. But you've got to remember one thing. Hot dogs were a dime. Hamburgers were a dime. The theater was a quarter. Gas was 18 cents a gallon. So when you made $5 on a painting, you were doing pretty good. It was through painting that the Warrens began their ghost investigations. If Ed heard of any place that claimed to be haunted, whether a haunted house or a haunted location, he would drag Lorraine to check it out. "Oh, Ed, there are no such things as ghosts," Lorraine would say. Ed would then remind her of his days at his haunted home in Bridgeport, and Lorraine would go. How the Warrens would get into these haunted houses is especially interesting. We were just kids. Nobody was going to let us in. We were curiosity seekers, and we were not yet the directors of the New England Society for Psychic Research. I'd go out in the middle of the road where they could all see me, and I'd start to sketch the house, and you'd see the curtains going back and forth. What's this kid doing, they would be thinking. I would do a really nice sketch of the house with ghosts coming out of it, and I'd give it to Lorraine. She'd go knock on the door and say, "Oh, my husband loves to sketch and paint haunted houses, and he made this for you. I made it special for them." It was through the paintings that the Warrens got themselves into these haunted houses, and then they would talk with the homeowners one-on-one. Basically, Ed just wanted to see if the same things happened to those families that happened to his family. Through his art, the lives of these two incredible people were formed. Ed Warren. If you look at a fan and it's standing still, you can see the propellers very easily. But if that fan starts up and you can't see anything, it's invisible. Spirits are on that different vibrational field. They're all around us right now, but you can't see them. But if you were like Lorraine, you could see them clairvisually, hear them clairaudially. I can't, and it wouldn't pay for me to do that because as an investigator, people would think I'm a little odd seeing ghosts flying around when they couldn't see anything. So I have to see it, have to feel it, I have to hear it, I have to record it before I accept it. Lorraine Warren. I know how to follow something. In other words, when I say follow something, when somebody talks to me and asks certain questions, I'll say, just lead in with what you want. I don't like to go around the bush. That's how I investigate. There are so many, and they're like mosquitoes, but whenever you hear about someone having a demonic experience, the entity is always claiming to be really important, a big player in hell. They like to play that role. Most cases, you're not dealing with demons. As a psychic, clairvoyant, and light trance medium, I have been endowed with special gifts, among them the ability to see a person's aura. I am able to factor in what I see from one's aura as a kind of aid to the psychic impressions I receive from an individual. People often ask me to explain my psychic ability. They will ask things like, how do you discern things about people? Or, can I do it? Or, am I psychic? Or, how do you know if a house is haunted? Perhaps my favorite question is, do you really believe there is such a thing as ghosts? That one really insults me, let me tell you. I wouldn't have been in this type of work for over 50 years if I hadn't believed in ghosts. But to respond to the original questions, I really don't know how I discern certain things. It's a part of myself that I can't explain. It's almost as if this part of me, the psychic part, is an entirely different person. Can I do it? Well, I don't know if everyone can do it, but I do know that we all possess a certain innate amount of psychic ability. It's like that saying, use it or lose it. If you don't have a reason to use that psychic ability or are just not in tune with it, it probably won't develop very much. Remember, I've been in literally thousands of haunted homes and locations. What psychic ability I had just seemed to develop naturally, almost through osmosis, I guess you could say. By being around it so much, it just seems to come naturally. Ed Warren. What Lorraine can do is very necessary because she can tell immediately if something is there. I wouldn't know. I could go into a building for a month and not know if there's something really there. I could interview the people and maybe through my knowledge I could tell if something is there, but the clairvoyant is the key. The spirits are drawn to a medium clairvoyant like a moth is drawn to flame. Many times we use 3 or 4 clairvoyants in one place. We take them into a house one at a time. They don't know where they're going, what the case is about, etc. And if they all tell me the same thing, that they see a woman's spirit in a certain room, or a man, or a child, then I know we're on the right track. I do think scientifically. We do have scientists working with us, and I think theologically and scientifically. There are organizations of atheists, so-called skeptical investigators, that say there is no proof scientifically that God exists, that spirits exist, that miracles occur. That's ridiculous. There's all kinds of proof. In the Occult Museum we have hundreds of items. We have thousands of cases between here and the other buildings out there that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the supernatural exists and the preternatural exists. When I say preternatural, I'm talking about negative, and supernatural is positive. We have filmed The White Lady of Easton. We have filmed poltergeists, attacks on people, ghosts, and we have taken many pictures of ghosts. We work with any clergy that their religion teaches love of God and love of your fellow man. We are not stupid enough to think that because we are Catholics that we are the only religion saved. That's what the problem is today. We work with people of all faiths. We have thousands of pictures of ghosts, and I'm not talking about filmy ectoplasmic type material. I'm talking about spirits that are clear as you and I. You ask us for evidence, we'll give you that evidence. We proved in a court of law in 1989 that a woman and her young child were driven out of their house by ghosts. She lived in Huron, Connecticut. We went into Rockville Court and we won the case. The realtor that leased her the house was suing her for $2,000. She begged us to go into the house and to get some evidence that would prove there really were ghosts. Now you don't walk into a court of law and say, well, judge, there was ghosts there. You have to have evidence. In any court of law, they use photographs, recordings, and credible witnesses as evidence. That's what we used. We won the case, we set a precedent here in the United States. Scientists would say you didn't prove a thing because you didn't take that ghost and put it in a bottle so we can open them up and examine them. That's stupid. They're saying that scientifically you have to prove that God exists, that ghosts exist. There is no such thing. You can't get scientific in a supernatural world. So if we can prove in a court of law that ghosts exist and haunted houses exist, I think that's good enough for anyone. The New England Society for Psychic Research was founded in 1952, and the goal at first was to simply investigate hauntings. Then around 1965, the Warrens went into a home where the spirit of a little girl named Cynthia was, and they listened to the little child coming through a deep trance medium, and she was looking for her mother. Ed thought to himself, this is horrible. This little child is earthbound. She's looking for her mother constantly, day in and day out. How do I help this child? It was no longer just experiencing the hauntings. Now the Warrens wanted to help. The question arose as to where to get the knowledge to help anybody in spirit. Well, who delves into the supernatural? Priests, clergymen, rabbis. Ed started interviewing dozens and dozens of clergymen of all faiths and would ask them, if somebody called you from your parish and said there was a ghost in the house, what would you do? Some said, I'd tell them to go see a psychiatrist. Others said, I'd go to the house and I'd bless it. If the blessing didn't work, I'd say a mass, and if the mass didn't work, I'd perform the rite of exorcism. But many Catholic priests interviewed didn't even believe there's a devil. And yet all of this material is part of Catholicism's teaching. It is in the Bible. Within every 10 words you have a psychic word. Apparition, ghost, devil, demon, evil. It's all in the Bible, everything we talk about. The New England Society for Psychic Research's work is based in religion but also uses science. People have said to the Warrens, oh God, you go into a house and you look for devils. And Ed's response, you're damn right I look for devils, and I look for everything else too. And I have the scientists with me and they're looking for something else, and we get together and we talk and straighten the whole thing out. Nobody can bring us into a house and fool us. You couldn't tell us your house is haunted and get away with it because I'm the biggest skeptic going. I have to see it, I have to hear it, and I have to feel it within the physical sense. Medical doctors, researchers, police officers, nurses, college students, and housewives are all dedicated members who volunteer their services. The New England Society for Psychic Research does not charge for their services and only asks for expenses to be covered. People have said Ed Warren hides behind his beliefs of Catholicism, but he claims he uses them. He doesn't hide behind anything. And I know that biblical beliefs are fact because I've seen and I've heard and I've felt all the things that it talks about. People have called Ed Warren an eccentric because he believes in devils and demons. Of course I do, he replies. I learned about them as a child, and I proved they exist as a man, without a shadow of a doubt. If you don't want to call them devils and demons, call them evil. I don't care what you call them. Religions are man-made, but spirituality isn't. From the days that I went into a haunted house, I always wanted media people with me, and people condemned me for that. They said, Ed Warren wants to be written up in newspapers. He wants to have books and movies. He wants to be exposed to the public. You're damn right I do. My whole thought is, expose the devil and expose evil. A skeptical public is the best protection that evil has, and I'm going to make sure that I expose that evil any way I can. People tell us that we get a lot of money for what we are doing here. Our money comes very hard through these books and lectures. We don't get any easy money, and the money we get we deserve, and we don't charge for our services. But if you want us to come to Arizona, we are going to ask you for expenses. Skeptics Perry DeAngelis and Stephen Novella have investigated the Warrens' evidence and described it as blarney. Skeptical investigators Joe Nickel and Ben Radford concluded that the more famous hauntings, Amityville and the Snedeker family haunting, did not happen and had been invented. According to a 1997 interview with the Connecticut Post, Steve Novella and Perry DeAngelis investigated the Warrens for the New England Skeptical Society. They found the couple to be pleasant people, but their claims of demons and ghosts to be, at best, as tellers of meaningless ghost stories, and at worst, dangerous frauds. They took the $12.50 tour and looked at all the evidence the Warrens had for spirits and ghosts. They watched the videos and looked at the best evidence. Their conclusion? It's all blarney. They found common errors with flash photography and nothing evil in the artifacts the Warrens had collected. They have a ton of fish stories about evidence that got away. They're not doing good scientific investigation. They have a predetermined conclusion which they adhere to literally and religiously, according to Novella. Lorraine Warren said that the problem with Perry and Steve is they don't base anything on a god. Novella responded, "It takes work to do solid critical thinking, to actually employ your intellectual faculties and come to a conclusion that actually reflects reality. That's what scientists do every day, and that's what skeptics advocate." In an article for the Sydney Morning Herald that examined whether supernatural films are really based on true events, that investigation was used as evidence to the contrary. As Novella is quoted, "They, the Warrens, claim to have scientific evidence which does indeed prove the existence of ghosts, which sounds like a testable claim into which we can sink our investigative teeth. What we found was a very nice couple, some genuinely sincere people, but absolutely no compelling evidence." While it was made clear that neither DeAngelis nor Novella thought the Warrens would intentionally cause harm to anyone, they did caution that claims like the Warrens serve to reinforce delusions and confuse the public about legitimate scientific methodology. Some of the more notable cases the Warrens have been involved with include Annabelle. According to the Warrens, in 1968, two roommates claimed their Raggedy Ann doll was possessed by the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. The Warrens took the doll, telling the roommates it was being manipulated by an inhuman presence, and put it on display at the family's occult museum. The horror films Annabelle, Annabelle Creation, and the upcoming Annabelle Comes Home spin-off prequels of The Conjuring are loosely based on the Warrens' story.
That's probably the worst thing we have in this whole museum. That Raggedy Ann doll was given to a nurse in 1970 by her mother as a Christmas present. But as most girls do, even 28 years old, she would take the doll to bed with her, wrap her arm around, and go to sleep. I do the same thing with a pillow. But then she started taking it to the breakfast nook, where the arms one morning went onto the table. Now, she lived with another nurse, and they shared the expenses of the apartment, which was 4 blocks away from Hartford Hospital.
Right.
At that point, they told the girls about the incident, and one said, "I know a medium." So they held a seance that night. That was the beginning of many seances with this doll. They would come home at night, and the woman had told them, the medium, that there was a spirit of a 6-year-old child in the doll by the name of Annabelle, who had been killed outside of their apartment house in an automobile accident. Well, there was such a child, but God does not allow a child's spirit to go into a doll. This was a devil, a demon, inside the doll, which was impersonating the spirit of a child.
The Perrin family. In 1971, the Warrens claimed that the Harrisville, Rhode Island home of the Perrin family was haunted by a witch who lived there in the early 19th century. According to the Warrens, Bathsheba Sherman cursed the land so that whoever lived there somehow died a terrible death. The story is the subject of the 2013 film The Conjuring. Lorraine Warren was a consultant to the production and appeared in a cameo role in the film. A reporter for USA Today covered the film's supposed factual grounding.
When he threw them out of the house, he didn't yet know if my mother had even survived what had happened to her. It took him quite a while. He checked all of her vital signs. She was knocked unconscious. The Warrens did not want us to call the police. They did not want us to call for an ambulance. We were instructed by them not to call the authorities. And my father was down on his hands and knees over my mother, who was laying in the middle of the parlor floor. Everyone in that house heard her skull hit that floor. She had been tossed more than 20 feet from the middle of our dining room into the parlor in a captain's chair, in a chair that probably weighed 30 or 40 pounds, and just picked up and tossed in a split second. And everybody in that house thought they had just watched her die. And my father was so busy trying to bring her back that he didn't even call for help. But he threw the Warrens out of the house because it was that, or he had already just punched Ed Warren in the face and bloodied his nose and broke his nose and took him to the floor, a man twice his size. So it was going to get really ugly if we didn't get them out of there. The Warrens came back about 3-4 months later, right around Halloween of that year. So it was approximately 2 years after they had originally shown up at our door. My mother had no idea who they were when they came to the door. So that was another thing that the movie got wrong, because it intimated that she went and sought them out. She had no idea who this couple was, but it was a cold night and she invited them in to warm up. The only other time that we had any physical contact with them was just about 3 months after that incident, and they came to the house. They waited until they saw that my father's car was not there. Obviously, they did not want an altercation with him. And my mother opened the kitchen door and spoke with them through the screen. And basically, they said they wanted to come and see if she was all right, because they left that house that night not knowing what her condition was. And my mother assured them that she was fine, but she did not invite them across our threshold ever again. And they turned and they left and they went back to Connecticut. Then, in 1980, Mrs. Warren called my mother about 3 months after we moved to Georgia, sold the farm and moved to another home, and she wanted to offer my family a boatload of money to tell our story. And she had a ghostwriter with her, which I love that phrase, with her, named Gerald Brittle, who has since sued and lost a claim against Warner Brothers for actually having all the rights to a story that he has zero rights to. And she had him with her on the other end of the phone, and I was home with my mother when the phone call came. And Mrs. Warren wanted to tell our story in print and on screen, and my mother declined, and Mrs. Warren said, "You have to at least discuss this with your husband. This is too much money to just say no to." And so my mother agreed that she would discuss it with my father that night. When he came home, he gathered all of us up, and we went on an excursion into town to have dinner. And my mother decided to stay home alone. And that night, when she went down to throw a load of laundry into the washing machine in the cellar of our new house, she was attacked, physically attacked. And the next day, when Mrs. Warren called her back, she said, "The answer is no, and please don't ever contact us again." So, Cindy says that attack, even though it really hurt my mother physically, was the best thing that ever happened to her, because she felt like it stopped everything. It not only stopped any further discourse with the Warrens, but it also prompted my mother to beckon the power of her own Cherokee ancestors to lift this burden from her. And it worked. And for all these years, she's been free of it. We were graciously invited to a private screening of The Conjuring 3 months before its release. And Warner Brothers put us up in a beautiful hotel in West Hollywood, and they did a whole series of interviews with myself and my sister and did all the background on our family story. Consequently, they were doing the same thing with Lorraine. It behooved them to have us out there, not only to get our initial visceral response to The Conjuring, and with their fingers crossed that it would be good, but also so that they could get all of their background information ready to put out in the packages that go with the films. So it served a dual purpose. And when I came out of the elevator, Cindy and I came out of one elevator, and the elevator right next to it opened simultaneously, and there was Lorraine Warren, and neither of us had seen her in 40 years. And she opened her arms, and we just embraced. I don't think they ever tried to do anything to hurt us deliberately. My father thinks that they, were trying to exploit us for their own gain, and there's an argument to be made for that. But I looked these people in the eyes. When I was a teenager, when you're most open and you're also most watchful. And, I never felt that they never asked my parents for a dime. They made that trip from Connecticut 4 or 5 times in terms of conducting an investigation of the property. And yes, they did talk out of school about things that happened at our house that started drawing people to the house. They were dropping our name. They were talking about Harrisville. It was easy enough for anybody that was interested to come into town and go to the general store and find out where the house was. So, they made some mistakes. They did. Lorraine even admitted to me that they were in over their heads from the inception, and that Ed's last request of her prior to his death was to make sure that the Perrin family story got told, because he always insisted, verbally and in print, that it was, and these are his words, of all the investigations they conducted over 40 years as paranormal investigators, they described our haunting as the most intense, disturbing, and significant of all the investigations that they ever conducted. And that they did not have my parents' permission to share it after we left the house was the bane of their existence. It really was, because they felt like they were robbing people of this incredible story. And then when the story got told, it wasn't accurate.
Amityville. The Warrens are probably best known for their involvement in the 1976 Amityville horror case, in which New York couple George and Kathy Lutz claimed that their house was haunted by a violent demonic presence so intense that it eventually drove them out of their home. The Amityville horror conspiracy authors Stephen and Roxanne Kaplan characterized the case as a hoax. Lorraine Warren told a reporter for the Express-Times newspaper that the Amityville horror was not a hoax. The reported haunting was the basis for the 1977 book The Amityville Horror, and adapted into the 1979 and 2005 movies of the same name, while also serving as an inspiration for the film series that followed. The Warrens' version of events is partially adapted and portrayed in the opening sequence of The Conjuring 2 in 2016. According to Benjamin Radford, the story was refuted by eyewitnesses, investigations, and forensic evidence. In 1979, Lawyer William Weber reportedly stated that he, Jay Anson, and the occupants invented the horror story over many bottles of wine.
When we went into the house that day, we didn't realize that it was diabolically infested. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I would have to say that Amityville was a 10.
When we met with George Lutz, not Kathy, because Kathy and the children were not there. When we met with George, he wouldn't go anywhere near the house. He met us at a pizza parlor and sat with us and talked because he was so frightened.
Well, I understand that George wasn't really he was a no-nonsense kind of a guy,
He was
right?
really a no-nonsense man,
George Lutz was an ex-Marine. He was a karate expert. He ran around with motorcycle gangs. We're not talking about any altar boy here. We're talking about a rough, tough guy who, after 28 days in that house, fled, left everything behind, took his wife and children, and went off to California.
See, he was the type of person to me that felt like he had to always be in control. He would go out on the landings. It was 3 stories high. The home is very beautiful. The interior of the home is very formal and it's very beautiful. Mm-hmm. And he would go out and he would take his fist and he would tell what was there, or command what was there to come out so he could fight it. Because as far as he was concerned, he was very skeptical regarding the fact that anything paranormal was going on. At the time that this first began, he found it difficult because of his background to even believe in a God, never mind believe that something of this nature was taking place. Mm-hmm. But I have to say this, the Amityville case affected our personal lives more than any case we ever worked on.
In the beginning, George and Kathy would feel the psychic cold throughout all the rooms. No matter how many logs they'd throw on a fire, it was icy cold. That's because it's a psychic cold, and the cold is being drawn, the heat from the bodies of the people in that house is being drawn, and that heat is going to be used as an energy fuel source for the spirits in that house. So they'd feel the psychic cold, they'd hear magic whispering, voices throughout the hallways. At night, they would see ghost lights over their beds in the rooms. There was a time when George and Kathy found themselves about 2 foot from the ceiling. George looked over at Kathy and said, "Do you believe this? Do you believe it?" And of course, then they went and lowered themselves down into the bed again. But there would be the footsteps. There would be the slime that they would find on the staircase. Now, these are called apports. Mm-hmm. These materialize or dematerialize in such haunted houses. For instance, in many homes that we go into, we will find that you might see blood, as they did, coming down the wall. But if you went over there and touched that wall, there'd be no blood. This is a telepathic projection to the viewer, and it bypasses the physical eye, goes into the mind's eye, and they see it as a medium would see it. There was the marching band, as they described it, around 3:15 in the morning when the murders had taken place. A lot of things would happen at around 3 o'clock. We call this the devil's hour, because it's an insult to the Trinity, anything that comes in threes. They would hear this marching band. George would jump out of bed. He'd go running down the stairs. As soon as he'd get down to the foyer, the music would stop. But he'd look into the living room, that huge living room, which you'll see a picture of, and the rugs were actually rolled up and the furniture was pushed over to the sides of the walls as though somebody were actually marching there.
People are affected on their weakest, most vulnerable levels. And I think many times people of science go into a home like this not really expecting to be affected personally, just to be there and be witness to it.
Father Pecoraro told me about an experience he had when he left the house. He went back to his rectory. He was up in his room. Suddenly the room became icy cold. Ghost lights were shooting all over the place, and a deep, harsh, growling voice occurred in that room. He seen what he described as a lizard-like creature. Now, as a demonologist, I have seen Diabolical. In fact, at one time, I had seen 43 of them. I knew exactly what he was talking about. It's something that you can't describe to anybody. It's something that's from another world. Mm-hmm. And as he described that, you could see the terror in this man's face. He wasn't used to these types of things.
The Enfield Poltergeist. In 1977, the Warrens investigated claims that a family in the North London suburb of Enfield was haunted by poltergeist activity. While a number of independent observers dismissed the incident as a hoax carried out by attention-hungry children, the Warrens were convinced that it was a case of demonic possession. The story was the inspiration for The Conjuring 2, although critics say the Warrens were involved to a far lesser degree than portrayed in the movie, and in fact had shown up to the scene uninvited and had been refused admittance to the home.
The town of Enfield was North London. The kid I was a very outgoing child, very energetic. I loved swimming and I loved sports.
I was sort of helpful towards my younger brothers and sisters. It was just like a normal family life, really.
We had no knowledge of the history of the house before the happenings and the events started.
This racket started to occur in the back bedroom and some disturbance. And my mum came into the room and she said, "Johnny and Janet, pack it up and sleep. You've got to get up in the morning." And the chest of drawers near the wall and the door had slid into sort of the doorway.
There was like incidents that happened to me, like the curtain which wrapped itself around my neck, which was quite life-threatening for me. And it brought it home to me that this could kill you.
And we was all in a terrible state, very scared and tired of it. And it got worse as the time went on. We got more exhausted with it. This chair in the corner sort of shot forward about a metre in front of them on its own. And she sort of went like that, the policewoman, and she sort of looked in disbelief and was looking to see something was attached to it and one of us might be playing a joke on her, maybe. That's the sort of look she gave.
My neighbour called the newspaper. We didn't know what else to do, I suppose, like in desperation for some sort of help. The newspaper thought that my neighbour was drunk. They don't come across this every day, do they?
Oh my God. The levitation of those girls. They would levitate.
I remember being pulled from my bed. I felt like a cold hand feeling and pushed up into the air. It was like a force. And I was screaming.
Then they'd levitate, crisscross in the air.
It became, over the months, a bit of everyday life, which was quite bad, but before that I certainly thought that ghosts were ghost stories, and they were all fictitious. This voice channeled towards Janet's direction, and we looked at her face, but her mouth wasn't moving.
Ed, no. 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 Hold your... Let me on that. No, give me. No, I don't want to. No. Yeah, I'll do it. Ed, got hold a lot.
I think people thought at first that I was doing it deliberately. So tests were done.
Mr. Gross filled her mouth up with water when we all was watching, and the voice was still talking. And Mr. Gross asked him, "Where are you from?"
I come from the grave.
There was a buzz that went around that Ed and Lorraine were coming over from the States to witness, what was happening in the house. I remember that everyone thought, wow, this is fantastic, this is really interesting that someone's going to, really bothered to do so much, to come so far.
I've done research all over the world. I never charged for anything I did. what happened wasn't good. I needed to help them.
When Ed and Lorraine come to the house, to me it felt like some sort of comfort had arrived for the first time.
Ed and Lorraine exemplify, especially in the 70s, your neighborhoods, you know, how people weren't so afraid to help each other. You just did it because it was the right thing to do.
Lorraine has cited this particular case as being one of the most terrifying of her career.
What's your name? I never thought anything like that would happen to me.
She said, there's definitely some spirit here. And she said, I feel it's not always good. And she said, I wouldn't say it was very evil, but she said, I'm very worried about it.
Lorraine has always said to me, she goes, I know that this gig is ordained. You know, it was meant to be, and like it or not, you know, I gird up. And despite the fear and despite the weariness, there was never any doubt for her.
You can see it's the house, there's no doubt about it.
I don't think I'll ever be able to put a closure on it because the memories will always be there. It will never go. It's had such a big impact on my childhood.
Demons. In 1981, Arnie Johnson was accused of killing his landlord, Alan Bono. Ed and Lorraine Warren had been called prior to the killing to deal with the alleged demonic possession of the younger brother of Johnson's fiancée. The Warrens subsequently claimed that Johnson was also possessed. At trial, Johnson attempted to plead not guilty by reason of demonic possession, but was unsuccessful with his plea. The case was described in the 1983 book The Devil in Connecticut by Gerald Brittle. The story will be the subject of the upcoming film The Conjuring 3 in 2020.
We were contacted by Father Dennis, who at that time was pastor of St. Joseph's Church in Brookfield, and the call came in, and he spoke about a young boy who he had been trying to help, but recognized it as a case of possession. He spoke of David and David's problems. He said that David had a slight learning disability, but there was very bizarre behavior occurring to this young 11-year-old boy. David was in the very beginning stages of demonic possession. We went to the house this hot night. I can remember like the steam and the moisture coming off the ground. And when we got in the house, we were sitting there at the table talking. Now you would watch David, and he would be doodling, you know, drawing or something like that, and he'd be concentrating on what he was doing. And then he would look up, and it was no longer a little 11-year-old boy.
Now this 11-year-old boy would become extremely strong. I've seen nights when it would take 4 and 5 men to hold him down. He would be ranting and raving and yelling. There was times when he would attack his mother. Now this boy loved his mother. He loved his father. And at one time he actually broke the mother's nose, I believe. Arnie Johnson, who was a young man that was engaged to his sister, Debbie, would help every night to control the boy. He'd come home from work, and he'd have his supper, lay down, but then just around 11 o'clock was when this would occur to David. As Lorraine said, all of a sudden, you'd look at him, he was normal. The next second, it wasn't David anymore. And this would go on until the sun came up. The boy would roll around, he would go into fits. I seen one time when he actually levitated, had extreme strength, terrible obscenities would come from him. But this kid, at 18 years old at the time, would stay awake all night long and then go to work the next morning. But he made a fatal mistake. One night he said, and he screamed at these devils, "Take me on. Leave my little buddy alone."
Now, by this time, Tony, into the case, the Catholic priests were already involved. Father Dennis had left for Ireland. Another young priest was assigned to the parish at that time, and another young man who had just recently been ordained was also assigned there. They came to visit us. And the two of them, finally, it grew to having 6 priests involved in it. 6 priests.
3 of them.
3 of them.
From the Vatican.
3 of them ordained and schooled in Rome, these men. And they were very frightened of the things that Arnie would say. And I know that one of the Catholic priests even met with him to talk with him because he was so concerned about his welfare. And remember that when you challenge the demonic, it doesn't act at that particular given time. It waits until you are the most vulnerable, and then it strikes.
The Snedeker House. In 1986, Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived and proclaimed the Snedeker House, a former funeral home, to be infested with demons. The case was featured in the 1992 book In a Dark Place, The Story of a True Haunting. A TV movie that later became part of the Discovery Channel series A Haunting was produced in 2002. A Haunting in Connecticut, a film very loosely based on the Warrens' version of events and directed by Peter Cornwell, was released in 2009. Horror author Ray Garton, who wrote an account of the alleged haunting of the Snedeker family in Southington, Connecticut, later called into question the veracity of the accounts contained in his book, saying, "The family involved, which was going through some serious problems like alcoholism and drug addiction, could not keep their story straight, and I became very frustrated. It's hard writing a non-fiction book when all of the people involved are telling you different stories." To paranormal investigator Ben Radford, Garton said of Lorraine, "If she told me the sun would come up tomorrow morning, I'd get a second opinion."
We entered the home the morning after we were contacted by Carmen Snedeker and her niece, who was living with the family at that time. And we didn't know too much about it other than the fact that, when she called, she was hysterical on the telephone. When we got there, Ed went right downstairs into the basement area. After a little while, I went downstairs, and as soon as I walked into the first room, it was just an overwhelming bad feeling. I had a feeling of fear and like that I probably was picking up from the boy who had experienced what he had in that room, which was his bedroom. So then we went upstairs, and she began talking, and the niece began talking about the frightening things that were happening in the home. The one frightening thing that was happening in the home is that where the niece slept, which was on that main floor of the house in a small bedroom, the covers on her bed would levitate off her. They would levitate right off her, and then you would see something under the covers besides her. And that really, that would terrify this niece that was living there with them. So this went on for a period of time. We asked the Catholic priest if he was the parish priest, if he would come and bless the house. And he did. He did come to bless the house, but it needed far more than a blessing of the house, because it just seemed to antagonize what was there. Then there was these 2 people of science, and they asked Ed if it would be possible for them to go into the house and spend the night with us there in the home and see exactly what they, as people of science, would be able to pick up. They fled in the middle of the night. They never ever contacted us again. They left in the middle of the night. They actually moved from the school that they were teaching in Connecticut. They moved to some place, we were told, in New York State. So they were frightened. They were intimidated by what was there. Then we decided it would be best to talk to the bishop to find out what we could do. The bishop assigned two priests to come. One of the priests was an exorcist. The other was a very high-ranking clergyman, Catholic priest. And they both came there and said masses. They both wrote letters to the bishop that the house required an exorcism, but they didn't want to be the priest, to be picked to be the exorcist. And so the bishop assigned another priest as an exorcist, and the house was successfully exorcised.
The Smurl family. Pennsylvania residents Jack and Janet Smurl reported their home was disturbed by numerous supernatural phenomena, including sounds, smells, and apparitions. The Warrens became involved and claimed that the Smurl home was occupied by 4 spirits and also a demon that allegedly sexually assaulted Jack and Janet. The Smurls' version of their story was the subject of a 1986 paperback titled The Haunted and a 1991 made-for-TV movie of the same name, directed by Robert Mandel.
It was one of the most frightening cases we've ever been involved in, but I'll never forget the family calling us up, us driving up to West Piston, and going in, and as a religious demonologist, I do carry relics of saints. I carry a true piece of the cross. And about a half hour after I interviewed this family, they told us amazing things. First, how when they moved into the home with the grandparents, this was a duplex house, as you'll see. It's in a coal mining area. And they felt, well, maybe something was happening underneath because of the old mine shafts. But the things that were happening would be when Janet would go down into the basement to do the wash. And she'd hear somebody calling, Janet, Janet. And she thought, sounds like my mother. So she'd run all the way upstairs. She said, yes, Mom, what is it you want? No mother there. And then she would hear strange sounds from the different corners of the cellar. One of her daughters was making Holy Confirmation. This is a religious rite in Catholicism. And the girl came into the kitchen, and they were all excited about going to the church and having the confirmation. There's a huge light up on the ceiling.
Now that is bolted to the main beams that are in the kitchen, Tony. That light. Big, heavy bolts right into the main beam.
Now this light started to just shake, tore itself loose, and almost hit the girl. That, of course, was very unnatural. They checked everything. There was no way that that should have come off there. Then there was all kinds of trouble with the electric. Everything was going kaplooey. Television sets, toasters were burning. Wiring that they had just put in the house was just going dead. They couldn't understand it because Jack's father is an electrician. He put all of this in himself in his own house. And you know, a man that does his own home, he's got to do a good job. Well, from that point on, they lying in bed one night, and all of a sudden, the bed starts to rattle and shake. Then they start seeing black shadows moving across the bedroom. Jack and Janet are lying in bed, and suddenly, she's talking, and something grabs her by the leg and yanks her right out of the bed onto the floor. Jack at first didn't believe all these things until he heard the voices himself. He's seen his wife being dragged out of bed. Then there's the night when both of them are lying in bed, and both of them rise up into the air, up as high as the ceiling.
Just like the Lutz family in Amityville, Long Island, Tony.
And they're dropped onto the bed.
Werewolf. In 1991, the Warrens' book Werewolf, The True Story of Demonic Possession, was published, in which they claim to have exorcised a demon manifesting itself as a werewolf.
Well, this is the first case of a werewolf, or lycanthropy, which is the scientific name for it, that we ever came across in 45 years of investigations. Lorraine and I were at a friend's home, and we were speaking and talking, fooling around. All of a sudden, my attention was drawn to the fact that there was another Werewolf in London picture on. I thought, my God, they made another one? but this was different. It was on sightings, and I looked at it, and I was watching these police officers, real London police officers, talking about being attacked by a real werewolf. And I looked at Lorraine and I said, what do you think about this? And so as we watched, we realized that this man was the first case of lycanthropy that we ever had come across. So we took it so seriously that we flew to California. We talked with the producers of the show. They told us, yes, that Bill Ramsey was considered a real-life werewolf. And so then we flew to England, and we talked with Bill Ramsey, and I talked and interviewed the police officers who were actually attacked by this man. Now, he stands about 5'7", he weighs maybe 150 pounds, but he would take some of these bobbies, who were well over 6 foot, over 200 pounds, he'd throw them around like they were kindling wood. And the stories that they told us about this man were incredible. How he would ask to be locked up in a jail cell for his protection and the protection of the public. Now, the people out there listening to us right now are probably saying, come on, what are you talking about, a werewolf? Well, I think by the end of this program, they'll realize that Bill Ramsey was a real-life werewolf. But it was Lorraine, really, that talked me into going into London.
For someone that was never interested in things like ghouls and werewolves and vampirism, those things never really interested me. Things like ghosts and haunted homes, yes, I was more open to the fact where human spirits were concerned and the fact that homes could be haunted in such a manner. But there was something in the interview that day as we watched that television show in the friend's home after dinner that I looked at that man and knew that that was very sincere, that something was very real, and something inside of me told me that I could help him. Now, how I could help him, I really didn't know. But I carried it, according to family, I carried it to extreme. We went to California, and to get the information regarding the exact production company that produced that particular series on that werewolf was very, very, very difficult. And then I purchased it for a good sum of money. And that really angered Ed, that I paid that much money for a video.
Even if we find out that this man really is a werewolf, I'm not going to go before the public and start talking about a werewolf. Ghosts and haunted houses and demons and devils are bad enough. But now a werewolf, and in London, who would believe it? But it actually occurred.
See, when we got back home, when we got back to Connecticut, I must have played that tape so many times, and I tried to listen to every little thing, but the most important thing were the patches that the men wore. That was the tip-off that helped me to be able to know. There are 52 precincts in southern London, and in the middle of the night, while we were in London, we flew over to London for that reason. In the middle of the night, which was the quietest time on the highways and roads over there, I went to precinct after precinct.
I have to interrupt you at this point. There was a full moon that night. We were with Dr. Tony Giangrasso, who's the medical examiner for Fairfield County, and his wife, Betty. And I'll never forget it. A full moon, we're in London, and she's going into these police stations, little places, asking about a werewolf. We were laughing our heads off.
Union Cemetery. Ed Warren's book Graveyard, True Hauntings from an Old New England Cemetery, published by St. Martin's Press in 1992, features a white lady ghost which haunts Union Cemetery. He claims to have captured her essence on film.
But we've been getting reports for the past 20-some years of people who claim that they've seen a lady in white going along, on the road out there in the cemetery. And Lorraine and I decided that since all these reports were coming in, that we would investigate it. And I stayed in that graveyard for 7 nights. I'd leave the house around midnight. I'd go to the graveyard in my van, park the van, and I'd open up the doors. It was hot, it was July, August. Actually, this was August.
Yeah, it was the end of July.
I'd open up the van and sit back, and I'd see all these ghost lights flitting all over the place. And I thought, sooner or later, something's going to happen. And on September 1st of 1990, I believe it was, I'm sitting there, and I could see all these lights over near the Baptist cemetery, all around the stone wall. And all these thousands and millions of insects were just chirping away. All of a sudden, things started to quiet down. And I could hear what sounded like a woman weeping. I picked up my camera. I had a camcorder alongside of me. And I had the tripod set up outside. I didn't want to leave the camera out there because of the humidity. I took the camera out, and I could see all these ghost lights suddenly forming into a figure of a woman. Now, the film that I took of this spirit looks as though it's very far away. Actually, it was very close to me. It wasn't that very far away. And I put the camera up to my eye, and I let it go, and I couldn't see anything. I took my eye away, and I could see her. I immediately put the camera on the tripod and let it run, and I started to walk toward her as she was coming towards me, and she disappeared. Now, I knew I shouldn't do that, so I backed up again, and she came back into focus. At that point, she started to come towards me, moving through the tombstones, and these black things, which I can only describe as looking like, kind of like black poodles, were jumping up against her. We call these here wood ghosts or shadow ghosts. And they were trying to stop her from getting to me. Now, all this is taking place, you understand, in just a minute or two. And then she moves towards me and moves away, and this huge shadow ghost pushed her towards Route 59, and that was it. I packed up the camera real quick. I ran home in the car, I drove home. I woke Lorraine up, and I said, "You're not going to believe what happened." We put it on the VCR, and there it was. I had captured it. Now, understand that this is something that I had been looking forward to for 50 years. I had seen pictures taken of ghosts, photographs taken of ghosts. I had seen ghosts, but I had never had a video camera with me and the opportunity to get this on film, which I did.
The Warrens were responsible for training several demonologists, including Dave Considine and their nephew John Zaffis. In addition to investigations, Lorraine ran the Warrens' occult museum in the back of their house in Monroe, Connecticut, with the help of her son-in-law, Tony Spera.
I feel it's a duty, something that we were meant to do, and we do it. You know, a police officer don't like to go into a home where there's a madman with a gun, but he does it because it's his duty. I feel this is our duty.
The popular view is that the Warrens were charlatans out to make a name for themselves. The movie franchises intimate that they were in it for the money. Personally, I couldn't care less if they were frauds or not. They were endlessly entertaining, and I have been obsessed with them for years. Thank you for listening to Eclectic Obsessions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe on iTunes. Leave me a review. All 5-star reviews will be read on the show. You can follow the show on Facebook at Eclectic Obsessions, on Twitter at Eclectic Obsess 1, on Instagram at Eclectic Obsessions Podcast, and on YouTube at Eclectic Obsessions. I'd love to hear what you think. Feel free to email the show at ecobpod@gmail.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new Eclectic Obsession.
Super awful.
Personally, I couldn't care less if they were frauds or not. They were endlessly entertaining, and I have been obsessed with them for years. And so has Doggy.